Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of the J-Horror Virus, a documentary that is actually a British production from 2024 that was directed by Sarah Appleton and Jasper Sharp. Now its focus is on the Japanese horror industry from the late 1990s and early 2000s, so it is entirely relevant to this channel. Actually, a few years ago I reviewed another British documentary titled Category 3, The Untold Story of Hong Kong Exploitation Cinema, which was pretty interesting, I thought. So, is the J-Horror Virus worth watching? Let's see. So this charts the origins of Japanese horror films at the turn of the millennium. Films featuring vengeful ghosts manifesting themselves through contemporary technology against a backdrop of urban alienation and social decay. Now, the website i4Film gives us a pretty nice summary of this. Two threads define this documentary. The first is an exploration of the films themselves and how they emerged as a movement within cinema. The second is an examination of their historical roots. So both are informed by Jasper Sharp's years of research as a film scholar and by interviews with key figures, including an extensive one with Kiyoshi Kurosawa, whose movie Cure is identified as a foundational J-horror film despite not featuring any ghosts. Sharp highlights the fact that what followed were films made by film scholars as part of an artistic conversation. It's rare that economics is addressed in documentaries of this sort, but there's an intriguing look at the recession, which Japan experienced around the same time, and the way that it created fear of sudden instability and loss of control. And the rapid development of new technologies is also addressed as an influence, especially with regard to the contrast between the textures of digital and 35mm images. So I think that's a nice summary, but if you're already a fan of Japanese horror, there are some familiar faces in this, or perhaps some faces that you can finally put with names that you've seen over the years. Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Takashi Shimizu, Masayuki Ochiai, Noriro Sorata, Shinya Tsukamoto, Takako Fuji, who played Kayako, and Rie Ino, who played Sadako, and etc. They got a few more people in this as well. And it is pretty cool to see interviews with these historic names in the industry, and that's a big reason to watch this. And they give their opinions on things as well. Now, the J-Horror Virus is essentially a mix of these interviews with clips and footage of scary scenes from Japanese horror movies that are spliced in during the discussions as like a visual aid. And the aforementioned summary from i4Film mentioned a few topics, but they do cover lots of stuff in this documentary. You get that change from 35mm to digital film, the importance of the rainy season and how water is used in some of these movies, the Japanese legends that inspired some of the films, why there is preference for female ghosts who are out for vengeance, how Japanese and American horror differ in some ways, the timing of the economic bubble that burst in Japan, that was early 90s, I believe, and how it mirrored some of the important ghost films made during that decade. And then the actresses discuss their mental headspace while playing the iconic ghosts Sadako and Kayako. And there's more stuff too they touch on. Now, based on what I've said so far, you're probably thinking this is like the best documentary of all time. However, they do cover a lot of ground that has already been covered over the last few decades, either on the internet or in published books. So if you've been following the industry for a while, especially when you watch these movies when they initially came out and have been following the industry since then, you'll probably already know most of what they talk about here. But on the positive side, you're still going to learn something from this. And it's nice to hear the subjective opinions of the participants at the very least. I also have a certain pet peeve that I have to address here. And this documentary kind of brought it out. I'm not sure why everyone kind of feels the need to constantly cover like the same batch of movies over and over again. And, don't get me wrong, I very much enjoy a number of the Ring and Ju-on movies, and I rewatch them fairly regularly. But I do want to see a documentary about, like, all of the other Japanese horror movies that were released. You know what I mean? Even if they restricted it to the same time period. At this point, that would probably be more helpful to us, right? We're in 2025 now. Now, in their defense, they do mention a handful of other titles, a few of which are quite obscure, like Psychic Vision. But I would rather have a discussion on, like, Hisayasu Sato's films, like Naked Blood, or stuff like Rubber's Lover, the Haunted School movies, which they mentioned briefly, very briefly. Eiko Eiko Azurak, Strange Circus, Muzan-e, Uzumaki, and the bunch of anthologies that came out during the time period, like Prayer Beads and Rampo Noir, Meatball Machine and the violent gore films, stuff like that. And I do understand that this is a criticism about the focus of the documentary, not the documentary itself, but I think we need to do a better job of, like, pointing fans towards Japanese horror movies that are a little bit different from the stuff that's, in this batch of what they define as J-horror. And that kind of leads to another little criticism I have, is that they define J-horror as a limited number of movies made by a limited number of filmmakers. And I've always had a problem with this definition. And it does rear its head on occasions, like when they insinuate that Tomie and Audition were a part of J-horror, despite lacking most of the classification characteristics that they already established at the beginning of the documentary. So if you're a newer subscriber and have not seen my 80-minute rant about this, the video is called The Death of J-horror, and it's on this channel. So just type that in, type in J-horror, and it'll pop up. It's a feature video on this channel. I'll include a link in the description box as well. But that's like the main video of my whole channel. And I go into great detail on that one. So that's another little pet peeve I have about this. And then finally, I'm glad that they did show some footage of the movies. But at certain points, they replay this odd series of images that's repeated like a handful of times. And it's used as part of the introduction, and I've read online that there was some AI-generated imagery that was used within it, which is fine, I guess, but I would have preferred something else instead for that runtime. But I think at the end of the day, despite my many critiques that I've mentioned, I still think that the J-horror virus is a documentary worth watching. I feel this way for two main reasons: interviews with historical names in the industry, which was cool to see, and you'll probably learn something, right? Or if you're a newer viewer, you'll probably learn a ton of stuff, really. So I would say, depending on how many films you've seen, you'll get more out of this. If you've seen less Japanese horror films during this era, you'll probably get a lot more out of it. But if you've seen a lot, you'll get something. And you might even get a few recommendations, as well. So I moderately recommend this. I do. And it's streaming online. I forgot where. I think it might be on Shudder, if I remember correctly. But yes, if you've seen this, let me know what you think. And as always, I'll see you next time.